Whether they like it or not, the ANC will be forced to get rid of racial discrimination and BEE or removed from power. But the extent that South Africa suffers before that happens depends on its voters. For a very long time, the ANC had been the darling of the West. Nelson Mandela had been viewed as the poster child for international liberalism, and one could not utter any negative comments about the so-called party of Mandela without receiving heavy public scolding. This view started changing drastically since 2016 in most Western countries, and today it reached the point where the ANC is being forced to either adapt to the changing global zeitgeist or murder South Africa. This sentiment is not only visible in the recent comments and actions of American President Donald Trump, but also in bipartisan bills being pushed through the American Congress under the Biden administration. Anyone who understands American politics will know that it is so divided at this stage that bipartisan bills, those supported by both the Republicans and the Democrats, are virtually non-existent, unless the bill carries profound public and political support across the spectrum. This essentially means that the vast majority of Americans are anti-ANC today, from far left to far right. Similarly, although much less strongly worded, the ANC came under fire from other Western countries as well as international organizations such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Even their oldest and greatest friend, Russia, recently started condemning farm attacks on their state-sponsored media channels such as Russia Today, Voice of Russia, and Sputnik News. The only friend the ANC still seem to have is Iran, and this is creating even more problems for them on foreign policy side. After our recent demonstration at the United States Embassy in Pretoria, the Willem Petzer group received communication that targeted sanctions against high-ranking ANC members are imminent. But what had changed exactly, and why did the world's view on the ANC change so drastically? In this video, we will give an in-depth analysis on what changed and why and how that will affect us in South Africa. The fallout from the ANC's stubbornness against the international pressure will inevitably put our economy in freefall and put massive economic pressure on ordinary South Africans. But there is light at the end of the dark tunnel, and positive change will happen afterwards. Good day, dear friends. This is Willem Petzer speaking. Be sure to subscribe for more analysis like this in your interest and join our WhatsApp to keep you up to date on all the work being done by the Willem Petzer Group. Just WhatsApp your name and surname to the number on the screen to join. And even if you are already on our WhatsApp groups, you can still help us keep going and growing by subscribing for a small monthly fee. To do this, just sign me up to the same WhatsApp number still on the screen. We really need and appreciate your support. The ANC's economic agenda has historically been driven by ideals of so-called redress and transformation, correcting the injustices of apartheid by redistributing resources to the black majority. After 1994, this impulse translated into frameworks like black economic empowerment introduced in the early 2000s to increase black ownership and representation in the economy, and land reform programs to transfer land to black South Africans. These policies enjoyed some strong moral justification given the historical context. However, other countries and international organizations are of the view that over time, they became dogmatic, pursued regardless of economic cost, and constitute gross human rights violations. Despite growing international pressure, South Africa doubled down on these commitments. In late 2023, President Cyril Ramaphosa's government approved a new Expropriation Act, signed into law in January 2025, which explicitly permits the state to seize land without compensation. The Act outlines that nil compensation may be just and equitable in the so-called public interest. effectively giving legal teeth to the ANC's long-held call for expropriation without compensation, or EWC. At the same time, BEE policies have not been relaxed on the country. There were proposals to intensify redistribution, including a plan to levy a new 3% BEE tax on companies. In early 2025, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition floated a 100 billion rands transformation fund to support black-owned businesses to be financed by forcing private companies to contribute a share of their profits, as well as requiring international companies who do not make the ownership targets to pay hefty sums. While this plan was met with resistance by the public and the business community, described as a punitive new tax on businesses that could drive multinationals away and kill the economy, the ANC is not giving an inch to soften their dogmatic ideology. In foreign policy, the ANC has likewise adhered to ideological positions, often rooted in its history as an anti-apartheid liberation movement that received support from the Soviet bloc and championed global self-solidarity. This made South Africa an enemy of the Western powers, especially since South Africa officially held a neutral stance on global matters, but despite this, driving the agenda of Iran. This reached the boiling point when, in late 2023, Pretoria spearheaded an ICJ case accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza, effectively sacrificing our most profitable trading partner, the United States of America, for a country we ran a trade deficit with. Iran does, however, allegedly fund the ANC as a party, making it clear that the ANC will sacrifice an entire country's economy for personal benefit. By 2025, the cumulative effect of these domestic and foreign policy decisions is destroying the relationship with our only profitable economic partners. South Africa's relationship with the United States, its second largest trading partner, has reached a breaking point, ending our most profitable trade agreement, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, and replacing the 0% tariff benefit that come with it with a massive 31% tariff on South African produce. This move, announced in early April 2025, wiped out the benefits of AGOA overnight. It mattered very little that AGOA was technically still in place. The tariff hikes eradicated South Africa's preferential access, effectively expelling the country from AGOA in an all but name. Under US law, AGOA trade benefits are conditional on beneficiary countries not undermining US foreign policy by taking positions contrary to the United States and its allies on matters of human rights and global security. South Africa fell aloof of these eligibility criteria. Furthermore, it specifies that countries benefiting from it must protect human rights, and Washington had already accused South Africa of gross human rights violations. As a result, US officials confirmed that South Africa was in technical violation of AGOA. In a dramatic diplomatic rift, the United States even expelled South Africa's ambassador as well as many other diplomatic personnel over remarks deemed to be hostile, which illustrates just how poor relations with the US had become. The end of AGOA benefits and the new tariff wall have dealt a devastating double blow to South Africa's export industries. It will be felt the hardest in the agriculture and automotive manufacturing sectors. Two of our country's largest employees and a very large chunk of the South African GDP. The United States is the largest market for South African agricultural produce, including citrus, wine, nuts, and many other fruits, and virtually the only market for vehicles assembled in South Africa. For many automotive manufacturers, the only reason to keep producing in South Africa in the first place, despite highly antagonistic economic legislation from the ANC government, was the benefits from AGOA. As Business Tech puts it, the perfect storm of epic proportions for agriculture and automotives which together employ over 1 million South Africans, could very well rise the expanded unemployment rate in South Africa over the 50% mark. For a country already grappling with high unemployment, the potential loss of these US-linked jobs is a dire prospect. Even major South African companies have voiced alarm. Discovery Group CEO Adrian Gore cautioned that an exit from AGOA would hurt employment and GDP growth significantly in South Africa. The arrogance of the ANC in losing the country's most important trading partner is astounding.
This issue that Donald Trump fears so much will offer this question of the land. I don't know what Donald Trump has to do with South African land because he's never been here. And he must keep his America. We will keep our South Africa.
The video you just saw of Ramaphosa's speech is plagiarism from the speech Mugabe gave right before he tanked the entire economy of Zimbabwe.
Having and bearing sanctions banning us from Europe, we are not Europeans. We have not asked for any inch of Europe, or any square inch of that territory. So, Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe.
Afro-Marxists all follow the exact same playbook, not caring for their own voters, driving them into such poverty that their children resort to eating toxic rats to survive. Yet, every single election since 1999, over 60% of South Africa's voters have voted for the ANC and its ideological offshoots, the MK Party and the EFF. With that in mind, we can construe that every single ANC voter deserves to suffer to the fullest extent of the consequences of the ANC's actions. It's just a travesty that the rest of us will suffer alongside them. We have already started seeing the real consequences of the ANC's actions on the South African economy. It is not only foreign governments who have reacted negatively. Investor sentiment towards South Africa has soured significantly. Over the last week alone, we have seen an investor outflux of roughly 220 billion rands. This is more than 12% of the JSE's market cap. In other words, 12% of all the money invested in the JSE combined. Both domestic and international investors prize policy certainty, property rights and political stability, all of which have been eroded by the ANC's recent moves. The passage of the Expropriation Act, for example, murdered investor confidence in South Africa. By explicitly allowing property seizures without full compensation, the law undermines the sanctity of property rights, and memories of Ramaphosa's ideological twin brother, Robert Mugabe, in Zimbabwe, where forcible land grabs decimated the agricultural sector, triggered hyperinflation through deficit monetization, and caused the economy to finally collapse in total by 29, is fresh in the memories of investors. Zimbabwe went from being the breadbasket of Africa to a failed state with 94% unemployment at one point. An analysis by the Daily Investor bluntly warned that South Africa will repeat Zimbabwe's fate if it pursues EWC heedlessly, noting that it is understandable that many stakeholders vowed to fight South Africa's expropriation plans to avoid such an outcome. The mere threat of following in Zimbabwe's footsteps through its ideological similarities has already done irreparable damage to long-term investment as landowners question whether their properties are safe from confiscation. Meanwhile, BEE policies, in especially the more extreme iterations recently considered, have introduced further uncertainty and cost for businesses. The proposal to force companies to channel 3% of their net profit and potentially up to 25% of multinationals' local assets into a state-controlled transformation fund dealt a deafening blow to South Africa's business sector. And even absent that specific proposal, South Africa's absolute thick web of empowerment regulations continues to raise the cost of doing business in this country. The CEO of Nedbank recently opined that many elements of BEE deter growth and should be reconsidered as they have not delivered the broad-based benefit originally promised. A sentiment echoed by the DA, which noted that despite massive BEE efforts, the policy has failed to stimulate high growth and enterprises or appreciably reduce inequality. Many DA voters, however, question why the party still supports the concept of BEE in the first place and is not fighting for a total scrapping of these discriminatory laws, as they constitute gross human rights violations and, in and of themselves, only politically connected elites benefit from BEE deals while overall investment languishes in this country. The financial markets behavior in late 2024 and early 2025 reflects these concerns in real time. Foreign investors began pulling capital out of South Africa as the country's risk profile worsened to the point of being grey-listed by the Financial Action Task Force. It is significant to note that South Africa is the most sophisticated and the largest economy to be grey-listed for foreign investments. In the fourth quarter of 2024, overseas investors sold off South African equities at the fastest pace in this country's history, reallocating funds to safer and more promising emerging markets. How far have we fallen that international investors prefer countries like Zambia or Tanzania, which less than 30 years ago still relied on power from Eskom to survive, to South Africa, the former powerhouse of the Southern Hemisphere? The rand also reflected the deteriorating sentiment. The rand, which traded around 18 rands 27 to the US dollar at the start of April, weakened to 19 rand and 77 cents per dollar within less than a week. The knock-on effects of investor flight are dire for an emerging economy like South Africa. Reduced foreign investments mean fewer new projects, fewer jobs, and potentially a credit downgrade from the grey list all the way to the blacklist. It also places pressure on the balance of payments. A weakening rand makes imports considerably more expensive. Fuel, food, inputs for industry, which can feed into higher inflation for consumers. South Africa has already been grappling with energy shortages, low growth, and very, very high unemployment. A collapse in investor confidence adds another layer to this economic malaise. All of this is a sign of an even more perilous threat, a mounting fiscal crisis and a recession. South Africa already comes off of years of poor economic growth. The country's GDP is smaller today than it was in 2006. That's almost 20 years ago. And despite this, the ANC has continued to increase expenditure on items like public sector wages, free higher education, and plans for expansive new social programs. The country simply cannot afford to give all these handouts to the unproductive anymore. The two flagship proposals in this sense, a national health insurance or NHI system and a universal basic income grant, exemplify the government's ambitions to broaden social welfare, but these come at an enormous fiscal cost. As economist Dawie Rood said, cutting spending is not part of the government's DNA. Even symbolic belt-tightening measures like reducing the budget for ministerial luxuries like the 2 billion rand spent on VIP protection motorcades have proven politically impossible. The 2025 national budget made this trajectory very plain. With public debt already exceeding 70% of GDP and interest costs eating a growing share of the budget, the National Treasury faced limited options. In February 25, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana unveiled a budget that hiked the VAT rate and adjusted income taxes, effectively squeezing more revenue from the populace because the state has run out of ways to fund itself. The budget also quietly acknowledged failure on the spending side. Prior cost-cutting attempts had not materialized, and every major party in the GNU seemed content to maintain high expenditure levels. The ANC even secured the backing of several smaller parties outside of the GNU to pass the entire fiscal framework. This political consensus to avoid hard choices, to keep the spending intact, and simply find new revenue streams is extremely dangerous. It leaves South Africa with a worsening debt to GDP ratio and deficits that are unsuitable, and if this continues, a fiscal disaster or debt crisis is unavoidable. Such a crisis would entail South Africa being unable to service its debts, a sharp currency crash, and the need for an IMF bailout to stabilize the economy. This need for an IMF bailout is the best case scenario we can hope for, as the IMF already indicated that South Africa will need to get rid of its BEE laws in order to qualify for it. That being said, South Africa might need this financial collapse in order to finally get rid of the ANC's Afro-Marxist ideology. This is the light at the head of the tunnel I described at the beginning of this video, but we will get to that in more detail at the ending. The ANC is just like a wounded buffalo. It is dying, but it is at its most dangerous right now. It is trying to squeeze blood from a stone by giving SARS an additional 7.5 billion rands over the next 3 years to beef up its capacity with an eye towards recovering as much as possible of an estimated 500 billion in uncollected taxes. SARS believes a significant portion of this theoretical tax gap from corporate, personal income and VAT collections could be captured with better enforcement. However, any more money squeezed out of the taxpayer will likely be wasted, given the ANC's track record. South Africa already spends huge sums on government programs with very poor outcomes. For instance, hundreds of billions of rands on education, one of the biggest education budgets in the entire world, yet achieving some of the worst education results in the world. This can only be attributed to a complete incompetence and corruption. The country's fiscal multiplier is below 1. This means that each rand the government spends generates less than a rand of economic output, essentially a net loss. To such an extent, giving SARS more money to haul in additional taxes only fuels a cycle of government spending with netto negative effects for the economy, and thus it is tantamount to setting the money on fire. The ANC government's ideological commitment to expensive state-led development has not been matched by effective governance, resulting in a massive wastage and corruption that drains public funds. BEE funds, NHI budgets, infrastructure grants, all risk management. Business confidence in the state's competency is at rock bottom, and taxpayers are increasingly resistant to funding new ventures that will end up as looted projects. To put all of this very simple, the ANC is a parasite sucking this country dry, and nothing is stopping them yet. And the word yet being used here is of the utmost importance. South Africa reached a point where bailouts became inevitable, and these bailouts come with very, very stringent conditions. The ANC will have to get rid of its entire Afro-Marxist ideology. Whether they want to or not, it will sooner or later be forced upon them. South Africa as a sovereign nation will be unable to exist without bailout soon. Then it'll leave the country with two choices, both of which will be great for you and me. balkanization, or compliance. If it is forced to comply with the IMF, the ANC will have to get rid of all of its racial regulations and all of the other free stuff and handouts it continues to be giving to the most unproductive of the citizens in this country. If you made it this far into the video, we thank you. A substantial amount of man-hours are going into producing these videos, and we really appreciate those of you who take the time to view all of our content to the end. In light of this, to keep producing and at a later stage increasing the quality and the frequency of our content, we started a subscription program where for a very small monthly contribution, you can help us going and growing our work. And you'll be part of an exclusive club that does regular webinars on our work where you can give your own input. To sign up for this subscription, just WhatsApp sign me up to the number on the screen, the same one used to join our WhatsApp groups. We really need as many people as possible to sign up. Goodbye, and God bless you.